Letting Go of Resentment is a book that delves into one of the most emotionally corrosive forces in human experience, resentment. Through a compelling blend of psychological insights, spiritual wisdom, and poignant storytelling, the book guides readers on a transformative journey toward emotional freedom. It begins by acknowledging that resentment is not just a fleeting emotion but often a deeply ingrained pattern rooted in past wounds, perceived injustices, and unexpressed grief. The author sets the stage by describing how resentment lingers in the background of our lives, quietly influencing our decisions, interactions, and even our self-image. The opening chapters share stories of individuals who have carried resentment for years, sometimes decades, against family members, ex-partners, co-workers, or even society at large. Each story underscores a common theme: resentment rarely harms the person it's directed at. Instead, it acts like a slow-acting poison in the one who harbors it. These stories are raw, emotional, and often difficult, but they serve to illuminate how resentment takes root and the various disguises it wears: righteous anger, moral superiority, cold detachment, or passive-aggressive behavior. Rather than simply diagnosing the issue, the book invites readers to explore the emotional mechanics of resentment. Through the lens of neuroscience and psychology, the author explains how resentment activates the brain's threat system, releasing stress hormones and reinforcing cycles of negative thought. The narrative then shifts to the idea that holding on to resentment gives us a false sense of control. It's a protective mechanism that allows people to avoid vulnerability and grief. By keeping the pain active, individuals feel like they are preventing it from happening again. However, this comes at a steep cost: peace, intimacy, and emotional well-being. One of the book's strongest elements is its exploration of the stories we tell ourselves. The author suggests that resentment is fed not just by what happened to us, but by the narrative we construct around those events. For instance, someone might replay a betrayal over and over, interpreting it as proof that they are unlovable or that people cannot be trusted. These stories solidify over time and become a part of our identity. The book challenges readers to question these narratives and to see themselves not as permanent victims but as evolving beings capable of healing and change. Through a deeply personal chapter, the author recounts their own journey of forgiving a parent who was emotionally unavailable during childhood. This vulnerable account not only humanizes the theoretical concepts but also illustrates the immense relief that can come from forgiveness. It was not a singular event but a series of choices made over time: to confront painful memories, to grieve unmet needs, and finally, to release the expectation that the past could have been any different. This section is particularly moving and serves as a blueprint for others wrestling with similar wounds. Midway through the book, there is a powerful shift toward action. Readers are guided through exercises designed to identify and express hidden resentments. This process is not about venting or blaming but about bringing awareness to what has been suppressed. The act of naming the resentment is portrayed as a sacred step toward liberation. The author emphasizes the importance of honesty with oneself first, before any reconciliation with others can occur. Readers are encouraged to journal, meditate, and reflect deeply, not as a self-help gimmick but as a means of reclaiming inner space. One of the most transformative ideas in the book is that forgiveness is not about condoning harmful behavior, nor is it about forgetting. Forgiveness, as the author describes, is a decision to no longer carry the emotional debt that someone else has incurred. It's an act of self-respect and courage. The book introduces the metaphor of an emotional backpack. Each resentment is like a heavy stone, and letting go is the process of taking each stone out, one by one. This visual makes the abstract concept of emotional release feel tangible and achievable. The book also addresses the societal and cultural layers of resentment. It acknowledges that many people carry collective grievances, based on race, gender, class, or historical trauma. While the personal work of letting go is essential, the author does not shy away from the need for justice and systemic change. However, they argue that clarity and compassion can coexist with righteous activism. Resentment is not a requirement for change; in fact, it can cloud judgment and drain energy. True transformation comes from a place of inner alignment. In a chapter centered on relationships, the author examines how resentment often shows up in subtle ways, in the expectation that a partner should just know, in the repeated arguments that never get resolved, or in the growing emotional distance that neither party names. These resentments, left unaddressed, calcify into long-term disconnection. The book encourages honest communication and the willingness to revisit old wounds with the intention of healing, not blaming. Vulnerability becomes the key tool for reconnecting. Letting go of resentment makes a strong case for the role of grief in the process. Often, underneath resentment is unresolved sorrow, the pain of not being seen, not being loved the way one needed, or not having a voice. By making space for grief, the emotional charge of resentment begins to dissipate. The author likens this to a storm finally passing. Once the tears fall and the truth is acknowledged, clarity returns. This emotional release is not a one-time event but a rhythm that the book teaches the reader to honor. Throughout the narrative, spiritual traditions are woven into the practical guidance. Drawing from Buddhism, Christianity, indigenous wisdom, and modern mindfulness practices, the book emphasizes that forgiveness is a spiritual act. It's a return to wholeness. The most profound stories shared often come from people who had every reason to hold on to their pain but chose instead to forgive, not for the sake of the other person, but to free themselves. These accounts are sobering and inspiring, offering hope that healing is always possible. The book also cautions against premature forgiveness, warning that bypassing anger or grief in the name of being spiritual can lead to deeper resentment later. True forgiveness must be earned through inner work. Readers are guided through this with compassion and patience. The tone throughout is gentle but firm, healing takes time, and shortcuts rarely lead to lasting peace. In the final chapters, the author invites readers to imagine what life would be like without the burden of resentment. Not in some idealized fantasy, but in the real day-to-day experience of freedom. They describe the subtle shifts, less reactivity, more presence, a sense of lightness. Relationships become easier, creativity flows more freely, and a quiet joy begins to return. The book doesn't promise perfection but speaks of a deeper alignment with one's values and spirit. A closing parable tells the story of two monks crossing a river. One carries a woman across despite their vows not to touch women. Hours later, the other monk says, "Why did you do that?" The first replies, "I put her down hours ago." "Why are you still carrying her?" This story encapsulates the core message: resentment is a choice to keep carrying something that no longer needs to be held. Letting go of resentment is ultimately a guide to reclaiming one's emotional and spiritual sovereignty. Through thoughtful stories, psychological insight, and practical steps, it empowers readers to release what no longer serves them and step into a life marked by peace, clarity, and genuine freedom. It doesn't offer quick fixes or easy answers, but it offers something far more valuable: a path. A path toward healing that begins the moment we choose to stop carrying the past.